Hello and welcome to the Actor Populi podcast. Today we're doing a special all about the EU, its history, the Eurozone, and its commission. I'm joined by my co-conspirators,
Jack Powell.
And Jay Palambello.
So, before we get into the EU, it's usually been a tradition to first look at the UK's COVID statistics. So, to begin with, let's have a look at the UK's summary and the amount of doses given. So, to begin with, the people of the first dose currently sits at 29,316,130, and the amount on the second dose sits at 3,009,863. And those really aren't bad figures as far as we're concerned. We seem to be going on the up and up as far as vaccinations go. But obviously, it would be remiss of me not to also look at the deaths. And the death total, sadly, gets nearer to 150,000, currently at 148,125. And while that death figure keeps rising, it appears that it's rising at a slower and slower rate as time goes on, which I suppose in some ways is all we can really hope for. Jay, what do you think?
I mean, the vaccination is great, isn't it? Because last week we did it. The second dose was, I think, was at 1.7 million, and now it's at 3 million, so that's near enough doubled.
Yeah.
That's the second dose, and then we got 29 million. My parents got vaccinated this week. My mum on Monday, my dad on Friday. So I think I said last week how weird it is to see about people around you getting vaccinated, but it's great. It's great that we're prioritizing the vaccinations, and it's great that we're seeing the second doses coming in now.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really helping on the whole.
Yeah.
What about you, Jack? What do you think?
I think the vaccines are great because now that we're seeing the European Union start to close down again, it's really paying for our efforts that we have gone through to procure these vaccines fast. And if I would say one thing good the government has done is the fast procurement of vaccines. Probably nothing else. I do in fact rescind my comment I think last week where I said the government did a good role. I just remembered that Rishi Sunak's budget existed. I posted it from my head prior.
And Boris Johnson exists.
So
both war crimes.
And the whole cabinet exists, actually.
So
I also must apologise for last podcast. That's a couple of things. Cecil Rhodes, he was not a British Prime Minister, he was the Prime Minister of South Africa. And I said Winston Churchill was the third Great Britain in the 2010-2002 Greatest Britain competition. He was actually the first Greatest Britain. So that's a few little things that we got wrong.
That's a step up. I'm sure Winston Churchill doesn't mind because he's dead.
No, exactly. I don't think he would care anyway.
Yeah, definitely. So, on to Europe, and whilst we're on the topic, I know Jack has a lot to say, in particular about the Eurozone, so would you like to lead
Yes, specifically about the Eurozone crisis and the weakness of the Euro itself. I know one of our long-time fans, Archibald Elliott, who we hope is coming to Star soon, did a question about what we think of the Euro, and I think my overview of the Eurozone crisis serves as a good anecdote for what I believe the Euro is. Now, before I start delving into depth, I'm gonna go over a key problem of the Euro. Now, the Euro spans too large of an area. I'm gonna simplify Europe into Northern Europe and Southern Europe. Northern Europe is going slow, so needs a high interest. So, Northern Europe has a slow-growing economy,
just for our viewers or listeners, can you name some countries? What countries?
So, like
in
Germany, France. Wouldn't say the UK because they didn't have the Euro.
We're not in Europe anymore.
Germany, generally the wealthier ones, and then there's Southern Europe like Greece, Portugal, Spain, that had fast-growing economies. Now the trouble with €1 is that they are only afforded one monetary policy. That means they can only have one bank rate, which means they have to choose between should they benefit the slower-growing countries in the north or the faster-growing countries in the south. Now the European Union decided to set the interest rates very low. This encouraged northern creditors to give money to southern debtors. Yeah, I think I said that right. And that basically accrued tons of debt and housing, tons of debt. And then when the 2009 housing crisis happened, everything went to shit, basically.
Pretty much.
So
I have to put an E on next to that on our podcast.
Oh,
Definitely.
sorry,
A little
Liz.
explicit.
Yeah,
Doesn't
yeah,
matter.
yeah.
Doesn't matter.
So basically, these countries had lots of debt, and they were also running a government deficit. So
Right.
this is called a balance of payment crisis, where a country's central bank can't maintain their own debt. But this was made even worse by the euro, because these countries couldn't devalue their country to pay off their debt. So when the 2009 crisis hit, these countries found that the inflow of foreign investors buying their government bonds pretty much ceased, because the economy was shrinking, cash was low, investors couldn't or didn't want to or couldn't buy government bonds. I weren't on government bonds. I should have done this before. An investor can buy a government bond. This is basically giving money to a government with the promise that the government will eventually pay that bond back in full, and every set time period, the government will give you a percent payback as coupon payments. So if an investor gave 20,000 grand to the Greek government with a 10-year expiry date and a coupon payment of about 5% every 1 year, that investor would get £1,000 every year, and after the 10 years they would get the full £2,000 back. These are considered very safe because, again, governments should always pay their debts back. However, because these southern European countries racked up so much debt, they basically relied on these bonds to come in to finance other bonds. And when this income seized up, they couldn't decide their own monetary policy to make sure they had enough money to pay for it. So this led to really high debt and the absolute dropping of the credit rating of the bond values. So nobody bought the bonds, so the government had less money, so they got more debt to pay for their services, and on and on and on and on. You can see where this goes. It goes very badly. And I think it eventually led to about £215 billion being sent to Greece alone in a recovery fund. So the big countries hit by this were the southern European ones: Greece, Portugal, Spain. So the EU. This might not have been bad for like the UK or the US on its own, because they could control their own monetary policy. They could devalue their currency, they could change their bank rates, they could change their inflation rates. They did have the ability to deal with this in some capacity. Now, because these countries use the euro, they couldn't do that themselves, which is, I believe, a massive weakness of the euro, is that it's trying to cater to these two entirely different economies and suffers greatly at it. Also,
So what would you say to that about like the United States? Because they use the same. They use the dollar, don't they?
They do use the dollar, but the United States economy is fairly homogenous. They've tried to maintain similarities. There are, of course, massive differences between like states sometimes, but it's not as big as like the difference between northern, as in Germany and Greece was, or northern Germany and northern Europe and southern Europe. Southern Europe was growing massively and needed a different bank rate. Northern Germany Northern Europe needed a different bank rate themselves. Now, so again, key flaws of the euro: too big of an area to cover. Countries don't have autonomy on their monetary policy, and again, that's really bad. However, there were a few controversies in this. But these are the facts behind it. This is the juicy stuff. So basically, the credit rating of a bond is how safe it is to buy. People go off credit ratings and their the credit raters of EU bonds are two US companies called Moody's and the Standard & Poor, S&P, for those who know the stock markets. These guys speculate how good a bond will be to buy, and they give it a rating. Now, Moody's and the S&P dropped these bonds to dog shit, basically. They dropped these bond values to dog shit, and the EU got really mad at them because they're like, hold on, you're dropping all our bonds to dog shit. This is killing us really bad. Why are you doing this?
Yeah.
But you're not doing this to the UK. Now, they were probably doing this because they realised that the euro couldn't have monetary autonomy of its own, so couldn't recover from financial shocks. But these guys got really mad, and I think both the Spanish Prime Minister and the Greek Prime Minister were on word with saying that they believed the Eurozone crisis was a conspiracy caused by the US and the UK to destroy Europe, or the European Union. So what do you guys think of that?
Well, like on the conspiracy front, that seems very I would say absurd, but obviously I don't want to influence anyone else's opinion on that particularly. When it comes to the currency, it's almost as though it's too centralized as a system. What happens is this really centralized thing can't respond to local demand in smaller areas because it's too centralized. It's still set up for well, I would say it probably unequally benefits the northern European powers, Germany and France and the like, whilst to like disadvantaging people in Greece and Spain and so on. So the problem being that this obviously means that it can't respond to both of these needs at the same time, and because of that, because it's centralized, which I think is a problem with the EU in general, is its centralization and the fact that it spans over such a large breadth of land with so many different cultures and economies to take into an account, to the point where it doesn't seem like it can effectively manage all of these countries individually.
This is very bad, but we shouldn't just be negative. So if one of the main problems of this was the divide between the northern and southern European zones, maybe one currency doesn't fit all, but perhaps two currencies might, and with maybe some joint regulation, some joint offices, we could still see the benefits of the homogeneity.
I don't know.
Of just one currency. I think it's naive to think that two different, growing economies and stagnating economies, not really stagnating, but not growing as fast economies, could share the same currency. But I believe in the future, once we get out of this crisis, because I think we're still officially in the Eurozone crisis, I think it might be a good idea to look at maybe making a southern euro and a northern euro, so the European Union can both facilitate the northern interest rates and the southern interest rates. We can also link these failings to actually the history of the European Union and also the elective state of the European Union. So I will hand over to my co-conspirators in the downfall of the European Union, to Jay.
It's very bold of you to say that the European Union's failing.
Nice.
Well, apparently we caused it to fail, according to some people.
Well,
the Spanish agency is going to be knocking on your door, Jay.
I don't think it is to a large extent failing. I think obviously COVID it's not done very well on. So I thought, what a good way to start. Instead, before beginning with the history, which is always a great place to start, we should begin with what the European Union on their website says their mission for the 21st century is. So maintain and build on the peace established between its member states, bring European countries together in practical cooperation, ensure that European citizens can live in security, promote economic and social solidarity, preserve European identity and diversity in a globalized world, and proclamate the values that Europeans share. So all very nondescript descriptions of the of what they want to do. So history-wise, we can talk about we can split the European history into 8 periods.
Right.
So that's from 1945 to 1960, then 1960, then to carrying on. So if we look at it from 1945 to 1959,
the
European Union is set up in 1945 with the aim of uniting these neighbours to prevent bloody wars like World War II, because Europe's constantly been a battle throughout history. As of 1950, the European coal and steel community begins to unite, bringing the countries closer together. At this point, there were 6 founding countries. That was Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands.
Yeah.
And then obviously the Cold War started to take over in the 50s. And protests in Hungary against the communist regime kind of took place. And then, Jack, you might be interested about the bit that brought England to the EU, which was the 1957 Treaty of Rome, creating the European Economic Community, or the EEC, or the Common Market, as we know it. So Britain wouldn't join until 1975. However, they this is what motivated them to join. So the Common Market motivated Harold Wilson in 1975 to held a referendum where 61% of the English population voted to join the European Union. So, moving on, we've got the 60s, the swinging 60s, massive period of economic growth in the European Union. Thanks to the fact that European countries stopped charging custom duties when they traded with each other. They also agreed over kind of joint control of food production, so everyone now has enough to eat, and soon there was even surplus agricultural produce. So people were saying like butter mountains and wine lakes, all these things, and this really motivated more people to join. In, I should say, 1973, not 1975. On the 1st of January 1973, Denmark, Ireland, and I nearly said Ireland in like a really Irish accent. Ireland and the United Kingdom joined the European Union, raising the member states to 9. We get a bit more tension now in the 1970s with the very famous landmark but short event that kind of ended the swinging 60s, and this is in 1973, the Arab-Israeli War, which resulted in a massive energy crisis and immense economic problems in Europe and Britain as well. We see the last right-wing dictatorships fall in the Salazar regime in Portugal in 1974, and the death of General Franco in Spain in 1975. Countries start to become a bit more democratic. The EU, kind of lots more jobs, lots more money coming into the European Union now in the late 70s. And then we finally get more and more countries joining in the 80s. In 1981, Greece becomes the 10th member state of the EU, and Spain and Portugal follow in 1985. In 1986, the Single European Act is passed, allowing the basis for a vast 6-year programme aimed at sorting out the problems with a free flow of trade across the European borders and creating a single market. And then we had the massive fall of the Berlin Wall on the 9th of November 1989, leading to East and West Germany united and becoming part of the European Union. Okay, now we have Europe without the Soviet Union. So many more countries joined the European Union. In 1993, the single market is completed with 4 freedoms of the movement of goods, service, people, and money. The Maastricht Treaty on the European Union in 1983, and the Treaty of Amsterdam, and these all help people kind of join in a lot more community spirit than they have now. People are concerned about environmental matters, kind of come into play a lot more. And then in 1995, the EU gains more members, Austria, Finland and Sweden. And the thing I find amazing about the European Union is the sense of community that it shares. Millions of young people allowed to study with EU support. Communication is made easier. I think that's one thing I really like about the European Union. The euro in the mid 2000s, we've got the euro becoming this currency for many Europeans. During the decade, kind of the euro started to spread, and then finally 2010 2019, the global economic crisis strikes hard in Europe. The EU helps several countries to confront their difficulties and establish a banking union to assure safer and more reliable banks. I know Jack's not going to agree with that. And in 2012, the European Union is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, and Croatia becomes its 28th member of the EU in 2013. And then in 2020...
We're here.
Oh, no. In 2021, a United Kingdom leaves the European Union
Yep.
after being there for how many years would that be?
Quite a
47, I think,
long time.
around that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's my little short-ish
Yep.
history of the European Union.
Yeah.
What do we all think about the European Union?
Well, I mean, it would be good if it just stayed as a trading zone.
Mm-hmm. You think
I
it's
would
like
have, yeah. Go on,
yeah,
Tom.
letting trade
Well,
flow.
before we get into this, Tom, do you want to explain how the European Union works?
All right. So when it comes to how the European Union works, for a lot of it, okay, there's this misconception that the EU is entirely unelected bureaucrats. And while to an extent, some of the EU isn't entirely elected, that being the European Commission, a lot of the European, including the European Parliament, is made up of MEPs, and these MEPs are obviously elected the same way you'd elect your own MP for each, constituency, country, so on. So while these other parts of the EU are able to elect their own representatives, and these are like broadly speaking representative of the country, the problem lies, or at least I think the problem lies with the Commission, because the European Commission has a few main purposes. The European Commission proposes new laws in the EU, it manages EU policies and allocates funding, it enforces EU law, and it represents the EU internationally when talking to like other bodies.
So is it?
So
it's basically the most important thing in the EU, arguably.
well, we could argue.
No, I disagree.
We could argue back and forth on whether or not we think it's that or like the European Parliament or the European Council.
Because we've got the council at the top.
Yeah.
Which just do a quick rundown. The council at the top is run by the actual prime minister or presidents of each country, all the ministers within that, and then below that we have the actual European Parliament, which is Tom was talking about, which is made up of European MPs from all the countries.
Yep.
Just a quick rundown. When the UK was in the European Union, we had 73 MEPs.
Yep.
When Germany was in the European Union, 96, and when Cyprus is in the European Union, had 6.
Yep.
And then following that, you had the European Commission, which drew up new legislation, and its members are appointed for a 5-year term based on an agreement between member states.
Yeah.
And subject to approval by the European Parliament.
Yeah. Obviously put into place by the member states, but the inkling of the problem coming from the fact that these are never like passed by the people. We can obviously debate, and we have done on our democracy special, which is out on YouTube, about the validity of democracy and allowing the people to choose. But in our current Western democracies, it's usually standard that the people that represent us, we get a say in. So the Commission does a lot, okay? Because arguably too much for unelected officials, enforces EU law, EU policies, proposes new laws, and represents the EU internationally. We can talk a lot about other parts of the EU and what they make up, but this seems to mean a lot. So it's a team of like 27 commissioners, and there's a president and a vice president. The president is also also appointed by national leaders, and then the vice president, if I remember correctly, is based on suggestions from the EU countries. However, only suggestions. The EU countries don't get, as far as I'm aware, the final say in who the vice president is. So the Commission here appears to be a rather large unelected body that controls a rather large purview of Europe. Because obviously, if they're the ones enforcing EU law, they're the ones imposing sanctions on countries, and they're the ones topically in charge of this whole new AstraZeneca stuff. Obviously, the policies regarding the EU and the UK and AstraZeneca. As well as this, they're proposing new laws, so they're the ones who are drafting up how the EU works in most of its entirety, and they also represent the EU internationally. So when it comes to how the EU acts as a body to other countries outside the EU, it's the Commission. So, to me at least, that seems like a hell of a lot of power to give to just one government body, and I don't know how I feel about that. Jack, what do you think about it?
Well, I think having a unelected official in any modern democracy today is extremely bad, especially when they're so annoying. There's a lot of controversies with, I think, Jean-Claude Juncker. He said a lot of very bad things about the British people themselves, especially when we were leaving. And to be honest, it seems like they are bullying us out of the European market because we want to leave this thing that has transformed from a purely economic zone to a democratic bureaucratic parasite.
Yeah.
And we can definitely see that in our drops in imports. In our main exports, I think whiskey is down 75%.
It's
Lots of other
ridiculous.
things are down. Let me just bring up the statistics for you.
All right, whilst you're doing that, I'll quickly say for a trading block, the clawing, kicking, and screaming it did on our way out seemed a bit much, to put it lightly. It seems as though if we were leaving, if they couldn't have UK prosperity, no one could, which seems to be like this whole like process, and it went on and on and
We've
on.
seen that in the vaccines, haven't we?
Yeah. They just I don't want to obviously disparage any member of any MEPs in particular. I'm sure maybe Jack might. I don't want to put words in anyone else's mouths, but it seems remarkably childish. The amount of almost like spite that seems to go in right now into kicking the UK for seemingly just wanting to leave their quote unquote trading bloc. And while obviously the EU isn't like 100% some malicious entity, at the very least it's incompetent. At least I would say so. What do Jay? I know obviously you're a bit more in favour than the EU than the both of us and than us two. What do you think of the Commission? Because I would like your take on it.
Yeah, well, the Commission's only you can make that argument about the House of Lords, Tom. How it's
I would make that argument against the House of Lords.
and you can make the argument about the whole institution in the UK, but what we've got in the European Union is is made up of three
Hold on,
things:
Jay.
there's decision making,
Jay,
and it's
what we've got. Are you in the European Union, Jay? Jeff,
I am.
Do you have
I am.
something to
I'm in
tell us?
France. I'm in Paris. I'm in Paris. I didn't tell you bonjour. I'm in Paris.
How dare you?
Like I can hear the baguettes being. But I
Fair
don't know
enough.
what they do in Paris.
Have you can you hear Macron enforce agreeing with the new AstraZeneca stuff as brought up by Ursula von der Leyen?
Do you know what, Tom? I can hear the blood clots from here.
Oh God, I bet it's awful over there.
It is, yeah. Well, anyway, so we over here in Paris, well, it's been developing for the last 60 years, and they themselves say they're nowhere near finished developing it. So the EU's top, so it's made up of head of state and/or government meet as the European Council, right?
Yeah.
To set the EU's overall political direction and to take up major issues. Then you've got the council is made up of ministers of member EU states, and they meet frequently. So like we had a European Union minister. I can't remember his name. I know the Brexit one was Dominic Raab, but I can't remember the rest. Then they have the European Parliament, which represents the people, shares legislative and budgetary power with the council. And finally, the one that Tom was talking about, which is the relative, probably the least amount of power compared to all the rest. Yeah.
All right. Carry on.
Thank you. And then the European Commission, which represents the common interest of the EU, its main executive body, and puts forward proposals. So the EU, Tom made it out to be some kind of hooligans running in and saying we're going to be bloody dictators of the EU. That's not the case at all. The members are appointed for a 5-year term, and they are agreement between member states, subject to approval of the European Parliament. So there's a vote for it. And the Commission is still answerable to Parliament, and the entire Commission has to resign if Parliament passes a motion of censure against it. Okay, so it's relatively weak compared to the rest of the institutions.
However,
I don't know.
There's a large breadth of things that it controls and has purview over. Again, if we want to talk about this as like a small like independent commission, it seems to have too much power for such a commission to have. If we can talk about it's only a 5-year term, but it's still a 5-year unelected term, and you can talk about how they get resigned by the other officials.
Well, technically, yeah, you could talk about that, but surely that's the same with like Boris Johnson. He has a 5-year term.
Yeah.
And he's elected by members of his party.
That's because in the UK system, we elect a party and then the party chooses its.
Yeah, but that's surely the same in the European Parliament. Anyway, we're getting into semantics here, but all I'm saying is that I feel that it does have a substantial degree of independence, but its job is to kind of uphold the common interests.
Right, but who decides those common interests?
Well, the whole point is that there's people who are appointed from member states, so it's
Yeah.
not like
I mean,
random.
as far as it goes, and like being good for each member state, it really seems to have been good for, like Jack said, any of the Southern European countries. It seems to mostly be benefiting Germany and France, which seems, which doesn't seem right if we want to talk about like a representative democracy that's supposed to embody all of these countries' quote unquote common interests. Because I don't think the common interests of Germany are the common interests of Greece.
Yeah, I mean they're the large states. They want Germany and France
Yeah,
in the
Yes,
European Union.
which gives
but-
them more purview
So
over
if we
Greece.
think about England as a little microcosm, we would focus on Canary Wharf in London, wouldn't we? If we wanted to think about economics, rather than some village in Aberdeen.
But that's still vastly more localized than sweeping over entire countries in a similar
Yeah, no,
way.
that's what I mean. It's I'm using the UK as a microcosm for the European
But I don't
Union.
think that microcosm is entirely analogous to the EU as a whole. That would be my problem with that. Because I think there's a difference between a country to multiple. That seems even more deeply centralized, with local issues making up even more of a large population. Because some village in Aberdeen has a much smaller population than
Well,
Greece.
Thomas, you're hearing this,
Or at least
so
I'd assume.
I'm having a really good time.
Jack, what are you saying? We can hear you.
Oh shit! you all froze for me.
Just interrupted Tom.
Yep.
Making a fine point about Aberdeen.
Based on my fine point in Aberdeen,
What did you say? All the week today was like murmuring.
Well, it's being left in executive decision on my editing account because I was in the middle of something.
Sorry, Tom.
It's okay. It's okay. Jack, what do you think? I'll throw it to him.
You're obviously so eager to convey your point.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
Jack just really
I
wants to
wasn't
put it out
conveying
there.
my point. My internet froze. So I was
see.
like,
I
hey,
bet it did.
can
Yeah.
you guys hear
That's
me?
just an excuse
Wow,
for
this is
bad
what-
etiquette.
I'm sure.
Yeah, it is actually. But on that point, I think using the Canary Wharf as a microcosm of the European Union isn't a good idea, especially when the European Union itself, members joined for this co-prosperity group. They didn't join for the bigger members to be completely democratically outweigh them and have a democratically
Yeah.
unelected council decide what they can and cannot do.
Yeah, and you could say they can just leave, but as we've seen, that's a pretty hard process. Jay, I'll pass it back to you.
I was thinking.
Okay.
So one of the things that a lot of people say that most people join the EU, most countries join the EU just for the sake of money, right? But they tend to do it under the facade of like, oh, and then we'd be able to be friends with each other, and you could. I mean, the research grants that the European Union gives out to universities is great.
Yeah.
And the amount of academic headway it makes, in terms of like universities and also sports facilities and everything. I think we can't really neglect that the European Union has this amazing influence on so many things.
Yeah, definitely. Jack, what did you have? So, Jack, obviously you've been looking at this more of as a fiscal, financial way. So,
Have you got the trade stats?
Yes, I do
Yeah.
actually.
oh,
So
amazing.
on that point of the EU bullying us out of their markets, because we decided to leave. Our top products are whiskey, cheese, chocolate, beef, animal feed, lamb and mutton,
cheese.
salmon, pork, fish, and breakfast cereals. Now from
Breakfast
January,
cereal. That's
That really makes up
so
the UK,
broad,
doesn't it?
like breakfast cereal.
now
As
from
opposed to dinner cereals.
January.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Now from January 2020.
where's breakfast? Sorry, Jack. Where's breakfast cheese?
Now from January 2020 to January 2021, we saw a average decrease of around 60, around I'd say 70% decrease in all these products. Now some could say that's purely because of COVID, but I don't think COVID would have had a 90% drop in trade exports on its own.
If anything, it
salmon.
increased whiskey exports.
Yeah, exactly. Also to note,
Tom.
I know, right?
we are up one sturgeon maybe on the exports to the EU.
Oh,
Get
Maybe
it?
you want salmon,
we all. Oh no.
not
It's-
Fishgate.
It's all right. So yeah, this just seems these are massive downsides for leaving the European Union, and it seems because we decided to not partake in their democratic games, they are kicking us out of their market zone. And
They did. We're out now.
yes,
Yeah.
they have, and that just seems like they're throwing a tantrum because their bureaucrats don't have control of us anymore.
I could
Such a Nigel Farage.
yeah. Well, yeah,
They don't have, those bureaucrats don't have control of us anymore.
it does feel a bit okay. I think that there's nothing about it. Everyone would probably agree that the leaving process was a grueling one. One that I'm not gonna say the UK made it easy, but I'm definitely not gonna say that Europe made it any easier than it could have been, because I feel like at that point both countries were acting out of a sense of pride rather than anything to do with their actual citizens in terms of what they wanted. If you could, I mean, not entirely, don't get me wrong. There's obviously like a lot of minutiae. I will quickly bring up. So, whilst we've been dealing with the AstraZeneca problem, and Europe's obviously had very strong stances on where AstraZeneca should be fulfilling its contracts for, what a trade union should be able to say. But when it comes to that, have you guys see to begin with the EU talking about institutionalizing another hard border in Ireland after this being completely off the table as of our Brexit agreement? But then after this AstraZeneca problems, they brought it back on us, saying those it was threatened, then all sides aborted it and took it away. But the very fact that they were so quick to throw back out a hard border in Ireland, which seems to completely negate just the sheer amount of complexity inside of the troubles, something that I don't think even 7 podcasts could get through. What do you, Jay? What do you think? Any opinions on that kind of stuff?
Well, the European Union have been. I'll say this as a keen supporter of the European Union, but I would say that they've done an absolutely terrible job with the COVID virus, the coronavirus, and they have utterly. I think that because Italy, I mean, barely any people vaccinated there. They're all going into another lockdown now. The whole of Europe's going into another lockdown as we're coming out.
Yeah.
As we've seen, they've stopped vaccine shipments to Australia.
Jay, I'll put you. I'm not sure yet. I might genuinely censor out the word you uttered. We'll see.
Dun, 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 dun. You're just gonna put some really cheesy sound over it.
I may do. Anyway, yeah, carry on.
A country in the southern hemisphere, they stopped the vaccines going there. And they've been really terrible with the AstraZeneca vaccine, which we've talked about on other podcast episodes. So yeah, they've not shown well at all in the COVID virus. Jack, anything to say?
Yeah, I mean that's just generally bad. They shouldn't be using people's lives as a democratic chip, which it seems like they are doing by blocking the vaccines to different countries, because I'm sure.
I'm
like
going to censor you again.
But yeah, it seems like they use travesties and people's troubles as democratic chips, like swinging the hard border back on us after both sides abort it. That just seems like it seems like something a child would do, to be honest.
And the thing about the hard border as well, it's Ireland's a EU member state, and that seemed very, very harsh to throw them under the bus that quickly just because of that. Have you guys noticed how the average Europeans or French and German citizens trust in the AstraZeneca vaccine has plummeted as of late?
So all vaccines actually, they've been quite strange about most of them.
Yeah, I do wonder where that comes from, to be honest. That
was from I think it must have been November time when the vaccines started to December, because I remember reading that England was 75% willing to take the vaccine, and in France it was 20 or 10%.
Do you reckon they just don't trust their governments?
I don't think they do, to be honest.
I mean, after the Yellow Vest protests in France, that was something else. Okay, on Europe, has anyone got any closing ideas or statements? Because obviously we're hitting our mark on time here. Anyone, any closing statements? Jay, what do you think in okay, actually no, I'll pass it to Jack first, then I'll pass it to Jay.
Well,
for and against.
Let me stick my best Nigel Farage voice on. Ramona's
Please don't.
be gone. Fuck the European Union.
That's not his voice.
That was
He's not a
Nigel
Yorkshire
Farage.
farmer.
Yeah. Average Yorkshire farmer.
Nigel
But yeah,
Farage.
I mean,
How do you
my-
do?
Come on,
My,
he'd put on a Yorkshire accent if he could.
he would. But yeah, my actual views are, don't like the European Union very much. I wish they'd just stayed as a economic zone.
Jay, what do you think?
JJJ.
That's your new name.
The European Union, I think, though it does have some economic struggles that Jack outlined, these are kind of a product of a mass recession.
Well, I mean,
No,
they were caused by a mass recession, but the effect on the countries was caused by the European Union policy.
Okay, thanks, Jack.
Don't worry, Jay.
Well, as I say, it's only 60 years old, and it's doing pretty well. I mean, America had a civil war in the first couple of years of its.
Yeah.
So at least they haven't had a civil war.
Well, abolish
secondly,
America.
I think it's a great place for countries to be connected, but it's not the place for Britain. I don't think.
Yeah. Okay.
Britain has never been a part of Europe. It's always been its own power. Even in the days of the empire, when it had kind of 400, 500 million people in it, and 6 times the size of the Roman Empire, it was on its own doing this. It was never with France. Often opposed France and Germany.
Quite often.
Many a time. Yeah. So, Tom,
I do have
I'm going to leave with the final thoughts, and then we'll talk about next week.
My closing statement is, I'm surprised you made it through an entire video on the EU without mentioning immigration once. That's
well, it's really just a token policy, to be honest.
I'm fine not mentioning it. That's the usual.
Yeah, well, you've ruined it now, Tom.
I did.
Wow,
we weren't going to mention it, and now you just brought it up. Do you know what I can't stand?
You
can't stand? When did that happen?
Tom, you're too good. Okay. Tom, do you want to say anything else?
No, you know what? That's all I've got to say to you. I think we've hit everything. What are we doing next time, Jay?
As we're talking about democratic nations, we're going to be talking about something that's very, very undemocratic next week, where we'll be joined by the great Archibald Elliott of the Politibubble podcast as our guest, where we're going to be talking about monarchy, specifically the British monarchy and Queen Liz and all that's going on in the family, and also monarchy as a concept.
Yeah.
So we hope you'll join us next week for our special on monarchy, and we hope you enjoyed the podcast today on the European Union. Please be sure to follow us on YouTube, Actor Populi, on Twitter, Actor Populi, and on Instagram, you guessed it, Actor Populi. Thank you.
See you soon.
Bye.